And it is now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Rachel from Los Angeles.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm Rachel. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. Scott, thank you so much for asking me. It's been such a pleasure talking to you over the past couple weeks. I'm happy to be in Ventura. I'm always honored to speak at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I love what our secretary said, to keep in our prayers tonight and tomorrow, LA, just in general, for the fires and first responders and such. And I went to a meeting last night, and the speaker talked about how the people who prayed for him got him to the rooms, And so I think that there's a lot of power in group prayer. I meditate with my husband. I pray with him often. I do it with my friends. I do it with my family, And so I thought maybe let's just take a moment of silence to remember those who are suffering, not just alcoholics, but all human beings, and invite God into the room. Not that God isn't here, but I find that when I approach God, God reveals itself to me. So, just one moment. Okay, thank you. Now let's talk about alcoholism. That's what we're here for. I definitely suffer from the disease of alcoholism as described in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I treated my alcoholism with alcohol. I also treated my alcoholism with heroin and meth and Sharpies and detention from him and the right job and, all that other stuff. I heard people say when I first got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that they felt like they had a God-sized hole, that it's a disease of wanting more, which I identified with. But for me, I used to joke that I was just like born into existential crisis, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, always feeling out of sorts, not quite right. I definitely identified with speakers when they said, everyone else got a puzzle piece or a manual for life, and that they just didn't get it. And I felt that way. I have a twin sister who now is one of my best friends in the entire world, which is a promise of this program. But at the time, I didn't even feel close to her. We shared a womb, so there's no reason for that. I have two older brothers. I have two parents that love me very much. And let me just tell you, I didn't feel connected to anything that loved me or that I felt like I should love, I felt very separate, very other than from a very young age. And it talks about that in the Big Book. It talks about being maladjusted to life, being an outright mental defect, right? When I first read that in the Big Book, I found it very offensive. I was like, you're mentally defective. What are you talking about? But then it was broken down to me. It was really broken down to me, right? That my mental abilities had a defect in them, right? They didn't perceive the world in a way in which things were actually happening, right? The lens through which I was viewing the world was altered in some way. Later it describes in the book that lens that alters the way that I interact with the world is actually self-centeredness. It's selfishness, right? And because that's my lens, whenever anybody says anything to me, like, your hair looks dirty, or something like that. I just think like it's an attack on my person, my character. You know what I mean? Somebody asks me a question of like, oh, you changed your major? I thought you were doing this thing. And I'm like, well, they think I'm a failure at life. And, like all of this judgment and stuff because my lens is selfishness, And that's why I'm maladjusted to life, because everything is about me and it makes life, my husband likes to say, too abrasive. It is too uncomfortable. So when my dad handed me the Heineken instead of the Sprite on the table when I was 7 years old, right? I heard a speaker say this once in a meeting. It's still, I can viscerally remember it only when I talk about it, which is a key. But I viscerally remember that feeling of like drinking that Heineken, and it felt like liquid sunshine. Felt like liquid sunshine going down. I knew even at 7 years old that that was a solution to a me problem, you know? And I had never felt other than maladjusted, anxious, you know, discontented, restless, like the book says, before that. But that drink entered, and I was like, whoa, there's another way of being? Like, wow, you know? I did not become a 7-year-old alcoholic, but drugs entered the picture shortly after, alcohol continued, you know? But that feeling, it talks about in the big book, that feeling that I got, that liquid sunshine, that immediate solution to that maladjustment, right, was something that I chased for a very, very long time, you know? Before I jump into my story, there's a part of the big book called Spiritual Experience. It's in the back of the book. And if you're new here, which there's a lot of new people, we have that's the 12 traditions. We have the 12 steps up here. The 12 steps is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you read the 12 step, it says that we have a result of the steps. And it's not that I can drink and use the way I want to, right? It's not. The result is I've had a spiritual experience, right? So what the heck is a spiritual experience and why do I want it, right? Like it's a question I should be asking myself if I'm new. You know, in the back of the big book, it gives me some explanations of what a spiritual experience is. If I do the 12 steps, I can assume that this is going to be the result, right? It says a vast change in feeling and outlook, right? Meaning the way that I view the world and the people around me is going to change, right? It says a profound alteration in my reaction to life. Right? It's going to shift the way that I respond to the world, right? That sounds pretty good so far, you know? But when I read that in the back of the book, which I did not know that existed until I had about 3.5 years sober, but somebody pointed it out to me in the back of the book, and I was like, whoa, that is exactly how heroin used to make me feel. It profoundly altered my reaction to life. I had that first Heineken, and it profoundly altered my reaction to life. It wasn't that my, dad was ignoring me anymore. It was like, I don't need my dad anymore, party time, you know what I mean? Like, it changed my reaction to life. And that experience is what I got from drugs and alcohol. It was a power source, right? That entered my life, only we're all here because that power source was insufficient. It stopped working in a reliable, consistent, useful manner in my life. And so I'm told to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? But the process of the 12 steps exactly gets me connected, gets me access to a new power source, right? That is sufficient and that will last the rest of my life, right? And it will relieve me of the obsession that I'll even think drugs and alcohol will be a solution to my problem anymore, right? I'll be so connected with this other amazing power source that I won't think that I need alcohol to be okay or to make the situation better, which is freedom. So what's offered in Alcoholics Anonymous, honestly, is freedom, right? But the best explanation that I have for what happens to me when I drink and I use that spiritual experience that I got from drugs and alcohol is this. I am a very shy, insecure, definitely was in middle school and high school girl. I could not talk to boys at all for any reason. I was president of Calculus Club. Enough said, We had these sweaters that said the function of EXY, which just looked like sexy on the back. It was like so nerdy. I went to calculus camp, right? But I brought a bottle of Jack Daniels and a baggie of edibles. And I snuck into the boys' cabin, and you better believe that night I made out with 5 dudes. It was an immediate solution to a problem, right? There's this circuit speaker, and I identify with him so much. He says we have an itty-bitty shitty committee in our head, right? This hamster wheel in my head that tells me horrible things, I'm never going to be good enough. Nobody ever liked me. My parents are only pretending. I don't know if you guys identify with this, right? But I have this weird, I'm the biggest piece of crap that the world revolves around sort of thing, right? And an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And that looks like, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Truman Show, right? Like, I start to really believe things like that because that voice in my head is so loud, right? I'm never going to amount to anything. And when I drank and I used, it replaced those voices, right? It really replaced those voices from I'm not attractive, nobody likes me, nobody wants to be my friend, and all of a sudden it was like every girl wants to be you and every guy wants to do you, you know? But damn, you look good. You've never looked so good, you know? Everyone wants to be your best friend, right? Tell me that's not a spiritual experience. Right? It altered my reaction to life. It altered the way that I viewed you guys. It altered the way that I viewed myself. Right? It made me feel important. In Bill's story, he says, I have arrived. Right? I would prove to the world that I was important. Right? That is a power source, for sure. Only the effect that I got, if you identify with that effect, like that only happens in alcoholics. Right? It talks about it in the doctor's opinion. It says that effect on people like us is so elusive. And when I think about elusive, I think about trying to pick up sand and watching it fall through your fingers. You can't hold on to it very well. You know, it's elusive. That effect is so elusive that even though it is injurious, right? I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I wake up in places like West Virginia next to people I don't know, right? It says, even though I can admit it is injurious, after a time, I can't tell the true from the false. So I wake up in places like West Virginia next to people I don't know, right? And the first thought in my mind is, oh, crap, how am I going to get more alcohol? The second thought in my mind is, I bet I can find some mail downstairs with this guy's name on it, right? I can convince him that we're totally in love. Obviously, he flew me here. He probably thinks that already, right? And then he'll buy me a plane ticket home. He'll buy me some alcohol, right? Like, I can't tell the true from the false. The alcoholic life seems the only normal one, right? I look back on those types of things and I don't identify with that person anymore. But when you're in it, you can't see anything else. You know, it felt very normal. And I thought, what a funny story that would be, you know? And that's the part of alcoholism that is really scary, right? Like, I can't change the fact that I have an allergy to drugs and alcohol, right? Just like when I first got in the rooms, people explained it like people who are allergic to peanut butter don't try to eat peanut butter cookies, you know what I mean? But this allergy that I have of like, once I put one in, the phenomenon of craving happens and I have no control over what is going to happen next, right? For me, the weed bone is connected to the alcohol bone, is connected to the heroin bone, is connected to the benzo bone, is connected to the I definitely need more money at that job bone. You know? They're all connected. They all distort my reality, you know? And because of that allergy that I have, right? Once I start, I don't know what the outcome's going to be. So I can't start. I know that for sure. But even from a sober state of mind, from a completely abstinent, sober state of mind, the thought will arise. This time, going to be different. Here's how, right? Here's how. And it'll have some crazy, trivial excuses of the ways that I'm going to control and manage my life better or different this time, right? And so then I can delude myself into believing I'm going to get the outcome that I want, you know? That's the real heart of the disease, right? It centers in my mind. It happens between my ears, right? So I really need to treat that. You know, there were so many funny things that people said to me when I first came in the rooms of like, you know, people would say like, AA's a cult, you know, that you get brainwashed here. And old timers would say, yeah, your brain needs a good washing, you know, like stuff like that. And it really made me think like, yeah, maybe I do, you know, like maybe I do need a good brainwashing, you know, clearly whatever I'm thinking about the world and the way it's working, like, isn't functioning. It's not working for me, you know? Perpetual victim, this one. Perpetual victim. self-pity, delusion, 100 forms of fear. Like, that's really how my life was ran previous to Alcoholics Anonymous. And honestly, on a day when I'm not approaching God, I approach the God of fear. If I'm not approaching the God of faith, you better believe I'm approaching the God of fear. My husband and I were just having a conversation in the car on the way here of how stubborn I can be. Still true, right? There's a few diagnoses of the personality of an alcoholic in the big book, right? It says things like obstinate, which just means stubborn, right? Unreasoningly prejudiced, which means somebody may have hurt me, or some instance I may have been injured by once when I was 3, but I'm going to punish everybody else around me for the rest of my life because of that thing. Unreasoningly prejudiced, Like, that's who I am. And so I don't realize it when I'm in the mode, but what happens is I create a world around me that is unsufferable by trying to manage and control my insides and everybody else's outsides, right? I'm deluded into believing that if outside my circumstances were different, that I would be different. If my dad believed me more as a kid, if he didn't ignore me so much, if my mom was home more, if my brother didn't beat me up, 10 months before I got sober, my boyfriend killed himself. You better believe that was a problem I chained myself to. A real big excuse for why I couldn't get sober, why you couldn't understand my problems, My alcoholism is so conniving that it takes regular human problems, things that happen in life, and it makes them excuses for why I can never be in connection with God's children. It separates me from you. And turns out, I need you. I need you. I die alone. I will absolutely die alone, So this entire process is a process of eliminating what stands between me and God and me and you, right? When I got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was really lucky to be surrounded by some old-timers, probably because they knew that I was going to be a real slow learner. They said things like, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. Sit down, shut up, and listen, They didn't say it with a tone like that. It was much more rough. But I needed that, I really think I am slow briety, Slow briety, but that's okay. More gets revealed, The point is that I consistently look for things in my life that are objectionable, that cause suffering, and I try to invite God into them to give me a new power, so that I'm not maladjusted to life, so that there isn't this abrasive reaction to every single person, place, and thing, In the bottom of the third step, it says this really interesting line that it's like, even though my motives are good, run on self-propulsion, I will always be in collision with something or somebody, right? For me, when I was new, I used to think, but I didn't mean to do that, right? That was my get out of jail free card, but I didn't mean to, that wasn't my intention, and somehow that would make an excuse for all of my shitty behavior, I try not to live by that principle anymore today. I try to take accountability for my behaviors today, I believe in the power of identification, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my story. I went from smoking weed out of an apple when I was 10 with my brother, which is not how people do it today. People are actually being hospitalized from THC detox or whatever. It's pretty gnarly. It's really crazy. But I smoked weed out of an apple in Yosemite with my brother. My older brother at the time was, I think he's probably one of us, but I can't diagnose him. Pretty abusive. And so it was one thing that we got to connect on, But I will say that weed was the one thing that I knew 100% immediately that I had zero control over, because I didn't even like the effects, and I did it anyway, right? I didn't like the effects, and every single time it was offered to me, I did it, right? That was the first thing I knew. Every other drug, alcohol that was offered to me, I liked the effect produced. And so I chased that effect regardless of anything. And that experience, as cocaine, more alcohol, heroin, all of this stuff starts to come into my world, into my life, I start to do more things that I don't identify with, right? And it creates this like tear almost within my soul. Right? I start to do things like steal my grandma's pain pills, after she's had back surgery or knee surgery, And like she genuinely needs those pills, But I convince myself that either I'll get her some more or I need them more, or whatever it is, right? I start to steal from my mom's purse. I start to sneak into my parents' room when my dad's out and, take his special $2 bills, I start to sleep with dealers. Right? And so my life starts to get progressively what looks on the outside to be more unmanageable, but really as within, so without, right? Like the universe inside of me was just, the universe outside of me was just reflecting the universe inside of me, And so the unmanageability that we treat in Alcoholics Anonymous is the internal unmanageability. I've learned here that nothing outside of me has to change in order for the insides to be okay, to feel okay, But this progression happened. I start to do things that I don't identify with, sleeping with my friend's boyfriend, sleeping with dealers for drugs, right? Going down to Mexico with one of my dealers and getting illegal weapons, stuff like that. Like I was raised, I'm like this small Jewish white girl from basically just south of Beverly Hills, and I'm like doing all of these crazy things, and things that I look back on today, I'm like, thank God I was alive. So what happens, I like to say the progression of my disease really reminds me of that science experiment that was done of a frog being put in water and then setting the water to boil. I don't know if any of you guys know about this experiment, but pretty much a scientist put a frog in a pot of water, set it on fire, and as the water starts to get hotter, the frog has the ability to jump out. It does, but it doesn't think it needs to because the water is getting so progressively warmer that it doesn't realize it's going to boil to death, right? Like that's the progression of my disease of addiction, So at first I'm just stealing from my grandma and I'm just, sneaking it out of my parents' house at night and, then I'm, sleeping with all these dealers. And then the last night of my using looks something like, well, not the last night of my using, but the weekend that my family found out and I asked for help, looks something like one of the dealers that I'm sleeping with is in meth psychosis. He beats the crap out of me, holds a gun to my head. I kick him, and for some reason, I ran to my sister's house that morning, And to be honest, that experience sounds really severe, but it was just another Tuesday with the life that I had been living up until that point. Like, it really wasn't that different, but for some reason, there was this window of desperation that happened, and I went running to my sister's house at 4 a.m. I could have gone anywhere. And she had me sit on her couch, and she was like, just rest, we'll call our parents in the morning. And I don't know if any of you have done meth, but you can't really sleep on meth. So her now husband, at the time, he's a normal person, has some weed, left it on the table. I don't know about any of you guys, but if you ever smoke weed on top of doing meth, purple people eaters come out to play. It is not a fun experience, right? And I swear, I will absolutely forget this experience as it says in the big book, right? It says, I will not be able to remember this on my own power. I don't have sufficient force to remember the injuries from a week or a month ago, right? So if I don't come and share my story, walk other people through the steps, talk about it regularly with other people, I forget this experience, but I come here and I speak at a meeting and I share this story and I viscerally remember almost disassociating, watching myself reach for the pipe, knowing that every single time I do that, I think I'm gonna die, right? Only now it's on my sister's couch, right? And so I'm hitting this, and every single time I hit the pipe, I think I'm gonna die on my sister's couch. I'm gonna die on my sister's couch, and this is not what I want, right? So what happens here is a true and utter concession to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic and I'm absolutely powerless because I did not want to do it and I was doing it anyway. And I think that that's the requirement, right? That specific, doing it when I didn't want to, is sort of the gift of desperation that gets offered here, right? And the beautiful and hard part about living a spiritual life, Alcoholics Anonymous, what we're walking through in LA right now is despair, right, and destruction lead us to hope and creation or rebirth. They're two sides of the same coin. We cannot have one without the other, right? So this destruction of self-reliance, of believing that I could use or drink the way that I wanted to, was smashed. It was smashed in that moment. So when we called my parents, I was really lucky enough to have family that was supportive, that wanted to help me and help me get physically separated from my drugs and my alcohol, send me to treatment, What happened was I was able to ask for help, and I was really able to see, I'm never going to be able to do this on my own. And I can't ever take one, ever, of anything, Not the California sober thing either. It doesn't work, So I went to treatment, and I was lucky enough to have a really amazing counselor who told me things like, girl, you are not that important, You're just not that important. Because I didn't realize I had been living my life for so long with me as the center of the universe. I had no idea that that's what was happening. And so when I got there and he said, you're not that important, it made me think okay, I need to start on a new footing. I love when people are not afraid to hurt my feelings to save my life, dude. Right? We need that in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The last line of the St. Francis prayer says, it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life, right? The requirement for a rebirth is a death, right? An ego death, a death of everything that I think I know about the way that the world functions, right? That's my real problem. My real problem isn't the drugs and the alcohol. It's that I think that they're going to make me better adjusted or make me feel better in life, So I need completely new ideas, I heard somebody say once, he was actually a grief teacher, and he talked about this book of supposed tos, right? And I thought, what a funny idea. I have a book of supposed tos. I have Rachel's book of supposed tos, right? And it sounds something like, if you've ever dated me, you're never allowed to move on, obviously, right? It sounds like if you hire me, you're supposed to realize that I'm the smartest and best employee you've ever had and immediately give me a raise. Otherwise, I'm clearly getting a new job, right? This Rachel's Book of Supposed Tos comes with all of these roles. Moms are supposed to be emotionally available 24/7. Kids aren't supposed to die before their parents, right? All of these lines, these roles, these stories, these attitudes that I've created in the world, right? They all need an overhauling. Turns out Rachel's Book of Supposed Tos, nobody else got a copy. Nobody got it, right? And so I expect you to live by my rules, and when you don't, I punish you for it, right? And then I play victim, But the truth is, we all have a book of supposed tos, right? So how do I get more in alignment with the greater book of supposed tos? Right? I need to get rid of my old ideas, right? My husband actually said this a couple years ago when he was speaking at a convention. He talked about this idea of the roles I assign people and how his mom isn't on this earth just to be his mom, right? And idea, right? My husband isn't on this earth just to be my husband. Turns out he has a job and friends, right? My mom has a job and friends and other children, right? I assign people these roles, and they're so limiting because I make them only in relation to me, right? And there's so many other roles. And if I allow them to live in those roles, or actually if I see them for the only role that matters, which is child of God, I might treat them accordingly. You know? My issue is that I don't treat people accordingly because I think that they don't treat me accordingly because they didn't get the script. You know? I think I need people to get my script in order for me to be okay. But what I really need is for me to get a new script in order for me to be okay. You know? The process of the 12 steps is not a process of addition. It's a process of subtraction. Less me, more God. Right? And that process can be uncomfortable. Right? There's this page in the book. It's page 25 if you're interested. It says, there is a solution. Great, so exciting, right? There's a solution. And then it tells me some things that I'm going to have to do, right? It says there is a solution. None of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, and the confession of shortcomings that this process requires. It requires it, right? Leveling of my pride, guess what? Not a fun experience. Not fun, right? But has to happen, right? Because the funny thing about my pride is that it's based off of false information, right? My pride is based off of who I think I should be and how I think you should see me, right? False information, doesn't matter. It affects me in a way that causes suffering, and it causes me react to a world that causes suffering, right? So I need an ego death, you know? I need to confess that I have become aware of these shortcomings to other people and allow a community to keep me accountable, right? God speaks through others sometimes too, you know? And more than anything, we read it over and over and over again in these meetings that we become almost jaded to it. But the end of chapter 5, how it works, there's so many hints in there, right? But they're ideas that I have to be absolutely convinced of if I'm going to be connected to this new power source that I talked about in the beginning, which is required for me. If I'm not connected to the power source of God, spirit of nature, creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, infinite love and power, whatever you want to call it, right? Doesn't really matter. You experience it. You don't think about it, right? If I'm not connected to that power, you better believe I'm going to connect to the only other power source I've ever had an experience with, which is drugs and alcohol, right? It's my only choice, power of God or power of alcohol, right? And I have to be convinced of A, I'm alcoholic and cannot manage my own life, right? When we get here, it can be pretty easy to admit that I'm an alcoholic. I have no control. Every single time I do X, I have no idea what's going to happen afterwards, right? But the second part, this my life is unmanageable, when I first got here, I thought that it had a lot to do with the consequences of my drinking and using, that was the reason that my life was unmanageable, you know? That I was living out of my car, that I was homeless on the beach talking to raccoons, Moira and Henry, you know, right? I thought that was why my life was unmanageable, right? But the truth is, right, that my life managed by me, drunk or sober, specifically sober, which is part of the reason that I had the effect produced by drugs and alcohol that was so significant, was that my life was unmanageable before the drink and the drug, right? Which means that after the drink and the drug, my life is going to be unmanageable. I am a bad manager, which means I need a new manager, right? Which is the process of steps 2 through 12. I get a new manager, and then I do everything in my power to get connected to that manager, right? That is my new job, right? Step 2 talks about insanity, which it says, come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity, which means in step 1, I have to admit I'm insane. It has to be done, you know? And I heard a lot in the rooms, which it's not a bad definition of insane, but people say doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I think it's limited. I think it's a limited definition. In the big book, it says, a lack of proportion of my ability to think straight. My proportionality is a problem, right? I think small things are really big. I think big things are really small. I use everything as an excuse to behave poorly, right? Like my proportionality is the problem, you know? So if I look at my behavior in that way, I can pretty much easily admit that I'm insane, you know? And because this disease centers in my mind, there's this Einstein quote that says, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. Which means that the act of prayer or connecting to a power greater than myself really just gives me a new perspective, right? A new consciousness, right? I don't know if there's any word nerds in here, but my dad's an English professor, and I really like etymology, right? It's so nerdy. I told you I went to calculus camp, okay, low expectations. But the root word of consciousness, co, means with, like co-pilot, right? And skios means knowing, right? So if I'm God conscious, I am in knowing with God. Damn, dude, I want that. Rachel's reality sucks. It sucks. I want the great reality, right? I want God consciousness. I want a perspective and a perception other than my own. I don't want to keep going over to my parents' house thinking, oh man, they just don't understand me, you know? I want to go over to my parents' house and be useful and bake cookies with my mom and make latkes for Hanukkah. And are you showing me time or just messing with them? 5. Okay. I want to be useful, you know? The truth is that I want sober, the experience that I got originally from the bottom of the bottle and the bottom of the baggie, right? And I have all of these prejudices and preconceived notions about what I think God is and a spiritual experience and God consciousness is when I get here, and I feel averse to it. I want to reject it so bad, but I'm also so desperate, right? So we can start really simple. The big book says, I only have to be willing to believe. I actually don't have to believe anything, right? And willingness, it's a verb. You do something about it, right? It's not, well, you know, I was thinking about praying this morning, you know? Can't tell you how many times I do that. I was thinking about writing inventory, you know, I was thinking about calling my sponsor, you know? The action, willingness is an action, right? There's this line in the big book, it says, although he came to scoff, he may remain to pray, right? So I don't even have to believe that this is going to work, but if I do it, it may work anyway, right? A wholesale miracle has happened here, right? The process of the 12 steps really is an awesome science experiment. I dare you to prove me wrong. Do all 12 steps and prove to me that you didn't have a spiritual experience. The truth is, if you do what is outlined in the book, what is required, it'll happen to you, not by you, right? A power works in and through me. I just get enough out of the way for the God idea to dominate, for a new conception and a new perception to come in, to offer me a new world. It says, the scales of pride and prejudice fall and a new world comes into view, right? An easier world, a more compassionate world, a kinder world, right? So I wake up in the morning and I don't think like, damn, I really wish he took me out again. You know, like I used to wake up like that. I used to wake up really being like, I used to fall asleep praying for God to take me, you know, which is funny for somebody who didn't really believe, you know, and wake up in the morning and be really upset that I was still here, you know. Today, I live a really, really amazing life. I was challenged to bring this up. I went furniture shopping today. My husband and I just signed a new lease, which is a really interesting time. There's, you know, some guilt that comes up with that, with so many people that are being displaced and unhomed right now, you know, consciously aware of that sort of stuff. But my life is really beautiful today. What has been offered to me is actual freedom, not relief, not the, oh, I just sit on my hands and white knuckle it type of stuff, you know. My life doesn't have to be, I like to compare it to waiting in a Denny's parking lot for my dealer to show up, you know? Like, let me tell you 1,000%, right? I used to wait in a lot of Denny's parking lots, and my dealer would always say, 20 minutes away. 4 hours later, guess what? My dealer's still 20 minutes away. I never moved. I would have never moved from that parking spot. You know, I believed that I needed access to that power of drugs, right? So when I come in here and I pray, and then the thing that I prayed for didn't happen immediately, I get on my high horse and I'm like, it doesn't work. Guess what? I waited for my dealer for 6 hours. Sometimes it's okay to wait for God for that long. That's the truth. If you want access to power, you show up and you pray and you have the willingness and you have the conversation anyway and you sit in the AA meeting now, not the Denny's parking lot anymore. Well, or maybe the Denny's parking lot with the newcomer, you know, a new sort of way around it, you know. But this is the price that has to be paid, right? If I'm coming to believe, that's a process, right? My husband's old sponsor likes to say that faith is a confident trust born of experience, right? Faith is born of experience. I have to be willing to try to trust something, to have a new experience, to do a new behavior in order to sort of build that ground for faith to walk on, you know? And my second sponsor really got me with this. She goes, if you don't believe, all you have to do is believe that I believe. And I was like, damn it, she got a loophole. I'm like, I know she believes for sure, you know? Like, But that's the truth, you know? If you don't believe for yourself, look around you, dude. Somebody in here really genuinely believes, you know? I was a hope to die junkie. I really didn't want to live from like the age of 9. It was so miserable inside my head and inside my body. I wanted out. I wanted out so bad, you know? I really believe that drugs and alcohol saved my life for a little bit because they made life bearable. They made life comfortable, you know? For a little bit until I started to lose myself, you know? The master, the god of alcohol, ran my life without my permission, you know? And so I ended up coming into the rooms, yeah, sure, with a lot of consequences and stuff, but more than anything, not recognizing who I was, you know? The root word of recovery, here we go again, to come back to, with, and verisitas, the truth. If I'm recovered, then I've returned with the truth about myself, right? I don't have to look away anymore, right? The truth about myself is I, like you guys, are a child of God, worthy of love, important. I matter. Oof. It's big. You know, it's big for somebody like me. One of my favorite speakers, his name's Sandy Beach, he talks about, he's awesome, dude. He's so awesome. If you haven't heard him, he has a lot of YouTube talks and stuff like that, Sandy B. He talks about how God loves us even when we're sinning. It is my judgment of myself that causes me to look away from that love, you know? I do something bad. Here's what my life looks like today, right? Here's where I still get bonded by self today, right? Fear shows up, right? I don't recognize it as fear because it shows up as self-righteousness, right? It shows up as I'm definitely right, you know, and I have to prove that I'm right, you know, but really it's just fear that I'm not going to be seen or valued or understood or loved, you know. I don't recognize it as fear in the morning. I react in these character defects by trying to prove myself right. I cause some harm, and here's the worst part about something like that, right? If I don't recognize it, if I don't recognize that that's what happened, if I don't do a 10th step, right? If I don't see where these areas of self block me off from a power, is I start to play God and I judge myself as unworthy and unimportant and beyond God's aid, right? And if I'm beyond God's aid, then I'm beyond AA's aid. And if I'm beyond AA's aid, then I'm sure to die, you know? I was told in no uncertain terms when I got here that I have two choices if I identify with the disease of Alcoholics Anonymous, right, with alcoholism. The first choice is to blot out the consciousness of my intolerable situation. Let me tell you, I do that sober. I do it sober. by ways I just described. I blot out the consciousness of my intolerable situation by thinking I need X to be different in order for me to be okay. And so I try to change that thing, and I drive myself crazy and all the people around me trying to change that thing, right? Ugh, unmanageable. Or I could do that, or I can accept spiritual help. Those are my only two options. Now, my brain is really, really, really sneaky, and it'll convince me that there's a third option, right? And it's really just the first option dressed up a little different, right? It'll be dressed up as the job or the validation from him, right? Or the podium at an AA meeting where I think I know something, right? It's going to be dressed up as those things. And if I take that door, eventually it's just a detour back to choice number one, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation, right? Which is rejecting spiritual help, which is my only choice to be okay, right? So the rest of the 12 steps, steps 2 through 12, are a process of getting me unblocked enough to learn how to accept spiritual help on a moment-to-moment basis, right? Let me tell you, I was high and I was drunk pretty much every moment of every single day. So I got to be connected to another power source every single moment of every single day, right? At the end of Bill's story, it says, faith has to work in and through us 24 hours a day or we perish. Like, that's not an uncertain term, dude. Perish sounds bad. It sounds really bad, It says words like grave, doomed, we're doomed, we're going to perish, And even with all of those warnings, I still am like, well, you meditate once a week, it'll probably be fine, Well, I didn't pray this morning, it's okay, I make excuses to not be disciplined, Because I come in here and I think I've been diagnosed with ADHD and BPD and, oppositional defiance disorder and all of these things that the treatment center gave me, And so you say words like discipline, I have to be disciplined. And I'm like, ugh, I hate that word, right? But the root word of discipline is disciple, to learn something, right? If I'm disciplined, then I'm willing to learn something. I'm willing to have a new experience. I'm willing to have my perception shifted, right? Which, as you know now, if you identify with me, is something that I needed. I absolutely needed a new perception, When I got here, I thought I had a drugs and alcohol problem. And I stayed and I realized that I have a perception problem, right? And so the process of the 12 steps, wrap it up. Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'll wrap it up with this. If you are new and you are in here and you think like, oh, I just need to dry out for a little bit. Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know that many people that come to AA who just need to dry out a little bit, But do this thing anyway. Prove us wrong. Find somebody who knows the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, who has had a spiritual experience as the result of the steps, and you just might stay anyway, right? Truly, 100%, the freedom that I got from the bottom of the bottle and the bottom of the baggie has been offered to me here. Only I don't have to sleep with anybody to get it. I don't got to steal from my grandma anymore. I don't have to do all of these things of this person that I don't identify with anymore. I feel whole. I feel forgiven even after I fall short of my chosen ideal, right? I have hope in my life. I have recovered from a state of hopelessness, and I now live in a state of hope, right? That is all we can ask for, really. So I hope if you're new that you stay, and if you didn't hear anything that you identify with at this meeting, go to like hundreds more. There's like 3,600 meetings a week in Los Angeles, even with the ones that aren't happening right now, right? So I hope you stay. Thanks.
Let's thank our speaker again. We welcome you to return next week and encourage the new